Hello, everybody. There is a very interesting tshuva in the Shilos and Tshuvas of the Rashba, in which he had a disputation with a scholar from the Yishmaelim, who had raised a question based on a pasuk in Chagai. The pasuk in Chagai says, "Gadol yiyeh kavod habayit hazeh ha'acharon min harishon." Remember that Chagai prophesies in between the two temples and sees the building of the second temple. And then he says that this house and its glory this last house and its glory will be greater than the first. And so the disputant asks the Rashba, is this not a proof that contrary to what you Jews believe, that there will be a third Beit HaMikdash, if the second Beit HaMikdash is referred to as the Bayit HaAcharon, the final house, then that means there will only be two Batei Mikdash and not three. That was his question, even though there are Mefarshim who understand this pasuk as being a reference to the ultimate Bayit Shlishi. But truth be told, in the pshat of the pasuk, the questioner is apparently right in making reference to the Bayit Acharon as the second Beit HaMikdash. And that's certainly how the Gemara in Masechet Chagiga seems to see it. And how is the second Beit HaMikdash greater than the first Beit HaMikdash? Either the building itself, as the Heichal was taller, or if you will, some maintain that when ultimately Herod would expand and beautify the Beit HaMikdash, it would turn out to be even more beautiful than Solomon's Beit HaMikdash Bayit Rishon. Or alternatively, whereas Bayit Rishon lasted for 410 years, the second Beit HaMikdash was greater in that it lasted for 420. So therefore, the question of the disputant seems to be in place. Responded the Rashba, the term Acharon, while it could mean the last or the final, in this case the final house, doesn't have to mean that. It can be a relative term, meaning the latter or the later house. And the Rashba takes proof from how Yaakov prepared his family for an ultimate meeting with Esav as they returned to Canaan. Vayasem et hashvachot et yaldehen rishona. Bilhah and Zilpah and their children were placed at the forefront. Ve'et Leah viladeha acharonim, and Leah and her children acharonim. Now, if you want to tell me that means the very last, then the continuation of the pasuk makes no sense. Vet Rachel, vet Yosef acharonim. So rather, it means that Leah and her children were put further back than Bilhah and Zilpah and their children. And then ultimately Rachel and Yosef were placed yet even further back than Leah and her children. And secondly, we have a reference to Parshat Shmot, where HaKadosh Baruch Hu details for Moshe a series of wondrous acts that he is to perform in order to convince Paro to let the Jewish people go free. And Hashem says, "V'haya im lo ya'aminu lecha v'lo yishma'u lekol ha'ot harishon." If the Egyptians will not heed and not take seriously your demonstration of the first miracle, here he's talking about the staff turning into a serpent, v'ha'aminu lekol ha'ot ha'acharon, then they will surely take notice and believe the latter or the last, however you want, but we'll see in a minute what it has to be, the latter sign or the last sign. And what was that? Moshe's hand becoming leprous in appearance. But then the pasuk continues, "V'hayam lo ya'aminu gam lishnei ha'otot ha'ela v'lo yishma'un lekolecha." And if they won't believe these two signs, then Hashem says, I have a third trick up my sleeve, and that's how the water of the Nile on dry land will turn to blood. So clearly, Acharon in that pasuk does not mean the last, but the later sign. If they don't believe the earlier sign, you'll give them another sign, a second one. And if they don't believe the later sign, the hand becoming leprous in appearance, then I have something beyond that to show them as well. So Acharon doesn't have to mean the last. It can be relative. It means the latest. The Imre Noam of Meir Horowitz, the Admor of Jikov, he makes an interesting observation that there is a pasuk in our parsha which is talking about preparations before the Korban Pesach that was to be brought in Egypt. We are told the Haya Hadam Lachem Laot al Habatim. After all, the Jewish people were supposed to smear blood in their homes, and therefore the Torah says that blood will be a sign ostensibly that the Malach Hashem would know which house to skip over during the final plague. And the Jikover says as follows, this pasuk basically is the response to the disputant of the Rashba. The Haya Hadam, when the Torah describes the miracle of the water of the Nile turning into blood on dry land, even though with regard to the second earlier sign, it had used the term Acharon, this will be a sign to you, Lachem Laot al Habatim, regarding the Batei Mikdash, that contrary to the argument of the Yishmaeli disputant, the Acharon is not the final house, the second Beit HaMikdash. It is simply a later Beit Mikdash than the very first one. But that doesn't preclude believing, as we do, that there will be a third Beit HaMikdash. I think in all of this, there's an interesting lesson for us as well. Sometimes we think a certain parsha is over, but in fact, it isn't. There is a saying that is attributed to the late John Lennon, but there might have been others who said it before him, that in the end, everything will turn out to be okay. And if it's not okay, then it's not the end. Sometimes what we think is the end is hardly the case. We have to have always the long view, and hakol l'tovah. In the end, everything will be okay. May we be zocheh to see the building of the third Beit HaMikdash that follows the second Bayit HaAcharon speedily in our days. Shabbat Shalom.